It is our pleasure and honor to have with us our esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Anjan Ray, former director, CSIR-Institute of Petroleum. Dr. Anjan Ray holds a doctorate in chemistry from the University of Pennsylvania and has worked for over 25 years in the chemicals and energy industries across a wide range of functions. He is the former director, CSIR-Institute of Petroleum, Dehradun. Dr. Ray's professional interests have spanned fields as diverse as specialty chemicals, surfactants, lubricants, oleochemicals, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, oil and gas, energy efficiency, biofuels, biotechnology, sustainable supply chains, and renewable energy policy. He is a recipient of the Indian Federation of Green Energy Jury Choice Award for the Outstanding Green Energy Activist in 2021. He has been felicitated with the Uttarakhand Ratna Shri Award in 2022 and the Energy and Environment Foundation Global Excellence Award 2023 in the bioenergy sector. More recently, Dr. Ray has received the Outstanding Contribution to National Development Award by the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi Alumni Association. It is my pleasure to invite Dr. Anjan Ray for his keynote address on ESG and its role in India's sustainable development journey.
I'm not sure, can you hear me at the back without the mic? Excellent. Every time we use the mic, we increase our carbon footprint, by the way. Okay?
It should work. It should work.
Yeah. Let me mic. So we heard Dr. Anjan Ray just now. We heard Dr. Anantha Nageshwaran just now, and he spoke from the perspective of an economist, political economist and policymaker with enormous experience in banking. Now, I'm much more of a generalist. I started out thinking that I will be a scientist or a technologist, but I ran into a most unusual guru in my career. He was my PhD guide, and he went on to win the Nobel Prize. His name was Alan McDermid. And he used to say things like, walk into the lab and say, Anjan, what are you doing? And I would say very happily, sir, I'm doing this experiment. And he would say, oh, really? And what is your chance of success? And I would say very happily, 100%, sir. And he would say, stop. You're wasting resources. If you're 100% sure it's not an experiment, throw it away, start over, do something that you're only 80% sure of, right? Then sometimes he would just walk in and say, Anjan, what degree are you getting? I said, sir, if I ever get it, it will be a PhD. He said, in what subject? And I would say, chemistry. And he would say, that's wrong. It just says Doctor of Philosophy. It is the narrowness of the human mind that we divide knowledge into subjects. So that's the kind of education that I had before I could actually start working in the lab. He sent us all down to the glass blowing workshop. We learned to blow glass and make all our glassware with our own hands, so that we would appreciate what goes into the everyday objects that we use. To me, ESG is about that. ESG is about respecting everything around us, the Panchatattva, the existence of other human beings, the existence of other species, and treating all as the Atman in ourselves. If we internalize that, as was just said, we internalize ESG. So I will just look at that and first start with the Sustainable Development Goals. it's in a way the Panchatattva or the Panchamrit that our Prime Minister talked about at COP26, all of those ultimately come back to the 5 Ps. But before we go there, let me give you an interesting statistic. There is an English word called pristine. The word pristine means pure, but we refer to it as a pristine beach, a pristine forest. What does it mean? It is a forest where human beings have not dumped garbage. If we don't put human beings in an equation, like during COVID we took human beings out of a lot of ecosystems, the ecosystem manages itself. The waste of one is useful to the other. And the most important learning from that, and we have one of the great practitioners here, we have Dr. Ajay Ranka here, one of the most important learnings from that is be frugal with your resources and use somebody else's waste and give your waste to somebody else to use. That was our traditional economy. Now, I grew up in a very small village in Bengal, and I don't remember garbage in my childhood. I really don't. These are the SDGs. Most of you have seen these. I won't dwell on these, but while most of SDG in terms of commerce talks about this one, decent work and economic growth, actually the most important one is number 12, responsible consumption and production. And all of these are interlinked. No SDG is independent of the other. But on the how side, number 17, partnerships for the goals, is what tells us that we do not live in a vacuum and we do not operate in isolation. If we are able to learn from each other and take a view that the greater good might require something which is delayed gratification for me, it probably gives us better value. There are concepts of this in Africa called Ubuntu. These are concepts of this in Japan called Ikigai. There are concepts in every religion, in every community, in every culture. But because we have fallen into, I will say this provocatively, we have fallen into a Western trap of irresponsible production and consumption. And why is it a Western trap? Because it's a use and throw. I do not remember, in my childhood, ever using a paper napkin and throwing it. Wasn't there. And just to test this, in the year 1999, at the time Mr. Purkayastha and I were still colleagues, I actually took off for 15 days to a forest, and for 15 days I lived in the forest alone. I wanted to test this. I ate fruit from the trees, I drank water from the river, and I walked 200 kilometers through villages that were in abject poverty in eastern Madhya Pradesh. The average household income was 100 rupees. There was no grazing land within 50 kilometers, so children never got milk except their mother's milk. There was no doctor within the entire taluka that I walked through. In one village, malaria was endemic. The day I went there, 4 people were standing, 596 were down. So, and people were still contented. So what is it that causes us to take a disproportionate share of resources from what's available? And let me just start with this Niti Aayog index. This is the SDG ranking of Indian states. Gujarat is at the top of the middle range. We are not at the top, absolutely, right? There are states ahead of us. But a ranking is just a number, like ESG scores are just a number. But it does tell you that there are some underlying issues that we should look at. Typically what happened, and this is not the fault of a state, it's not the fault of an industry, in fact it's nobody's fault. The world had its industrial revolution start in 1760. From 1760 to 1960, 200 years, there was no awareness, there was no writing, no public discussion on the fact that human activity damages the environment. None for 200 years. The first was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in the 1960s. So in 200 years, a lot of damage had been done. And when other places started to industrialize, what did they copy? They did not copy the mitigation, they copied the benefits. And therefore, we went into concepts like economies of scale. One of the most dangerous things that has happened to manufacturing in the world is economies of scale, and we will see why. Anyway, let's just get to the core issue of ESG. The core issue is the 3 E's, environment, economy, and equity. If we cannot balance the three, we will create some long-term problem for which the long-term cost will be higher than the short-term gain. This is the basic mathematics of everything that underpins the phrase ESG. And among these, all of us would have experienced this in some form or the other, right across our growth, development, life, existence. But the biggest challenge actually is in the middle of the triangle, where you have a resource constraint and everybody says, why not me first? Because resources are constrained. That behavior that he described being first in line, if you look at the way people get into a train in India and the way people get into a train in Japan, it's very different. When we go to Japan, we don't get in the way we get into a train in India, right? Why is that? It is because not only about manners and social frameworks, it is because you recognize that in that place, resources are not constrained the way they are in India, so you can afford to go in easily. The train is not going to leave until you board, so you're not going to worry that you're going to miss the train. So their behavior is also driven by circumstances, just as industry behavior is driven by the government's framework in which you work, how the state government relates with you, how the factory inspector treats you, how you are experiencing life when you go to a government office to get something done. All of those reflect your behavior as well, and that's human nature. But the core is this, and this is a very interesting mathematical construct called the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient basically just looks at income or wealth distribution. If everybody in the world had the same income, or everybody in a particular subset had the same income, your Gini coefficient would be 0. And if one person had all the income and everybody else had nothing, then the Gini coefficient would be 1. So a higher Gini coefficient is less equity. Interestingly, if you look at all the countries with high Gini coefficients, every country that is above 30.35 has been colonized at some point in its existence. Every country below 0.30 has been a colonizer in some point in its existence. And that tells you a very simple thing, that colonization over the 500 odd years that we saw it in active form essentially skewed resources, and resources underpinned commerce, and commerce underpinned income. So the question that we have now is, can we, as responsible industrial commercial practitioners, find a way to move our resources to a meaningful equity? And can we do that? You know, most old Indian business houses, if you go back and look at some of the stories of Munshi Premchand, or you look at from Bengal, if we look at Sharat Chandra, etc., all of them refer typically to the benevolent zamindar. Many of them refer to the gracious Raja. They were repositories of the resources, but they were not necessarily going to use the resources only for their own good. Right? That's kind of where we are now. That's what the thinking that we need. And we also must remember that our cities show greater inequality than rural. If I look at the Gini coefficients by state in India, you will find that it varies very widely. But the poorest states don't have the worst Gini coefficients. Like Bihar actually has a reasonably good Gini coefficient. So it doesn't tell you the absolute number, it only tells you the relative distribution. That links to another thing, and that is something that we are all very used to, which is energy. Again, it will surprise you to know that India is down at the bottom of per capita energy consumption. That's not because we are not wasteful in energy. It's because our energy distribution is badly skewed. Also, typically lack of energy correlates to poverty, and we do know that in our country we still have enough people below the poverty line that it should be a matter of concern to us. So if we do not address the bottom of the pyramid in what we do in some way, somehow or the other, we will be violating the equity component of the 3 E's. And therefore, a simple thing to do, I mean, I look at this room is not atypical of many rooms that I go to for talks or conferences, but this room is not energy efficient. We're running an air conditioner on a relatively pleasant day. We don't build earth air tunnels in India. There's only like 4 earth air tunnels in this whole country. And earth air tunnel simply takes air from 30 meters down the ground, and 30 feet down the ground. 30 feet below the ground, the temperature of the air is the average temperature of the whole year in that place. So typically in Delhi, there is one installation with an earth air tunnel, and that is a 28-degree air blower going through the room. So in the winters, the room is always warm. In the summers, you need minimal air conditioning. So many design features that were there in India, we are now building Western style. We're building with glass and tiles and ceramic, but tiles and glass are the most energy intensive materials we can potentially use in a building. 2% of China's footprint comes from only glass and tiles. I don't know what percent of India's does. This is the core. This is a philosopher called Ismail Serageldin. He was from Alexandria in Egypt. And he looked at what are the distilled learnings from all the books he had in the library. That distilled learning basically tells you that you should not take more from the planet at a rate faster than she can afford to give you, and you should not dump more on the planet at a rate faster than she can absorb. Two basic rules. So if in each of our houses, in each of our communities, in each of our cities, in each of our industries, we simply do an accounting of what atoms come in and what atoms go out in what form, let us remember that any waste that we put out is costing us somewhere. It might not cost us directly in our balance sheet or P&L account, but it's probably costing us indirectly in something, and it's not costing us, it's costing our future generations. The core is overconsumption. We are extracting, this is not only linked to population, in fact, relative to population growth, consumption of everything has gone up in the last 100 years except food. We are as a species, we are actually beginning to see nutritional deficiencies coming because we're consuming everything else much faster. And one very simple example, it's a startup waiting to happen, I don't yet know anybody doing it, is just collect aluminum in every form. Aluminum in every form, whether it's foil, or whether it's baking trays, or whether it's pharmaceutical packaging, simply treat it with either acid or alkali. Do you know what you get? You don't only get an aluminum salt, you get a second product. That's called green hydrogen, right? So there are many, many things we can do with all our waste, which nobody is looking at. Instead, we are talking in this country, it's a fad, like he said, about green hydrogen from what? Electrolysis of water. There's a 5 million ton target for green hydrogen in this country that will require 7 billion liters of water, fresh water of 99.9% purity when people don't have drinking water. So we need to really re-examine what policy says and what we need to do. And it's about using our minds, using our brains to reach decisions that are good not only for us and our business, but also for the world. Overconsumption leads to what? It leads to overuse of machines. So I, for example, I have not bought a new piece of textiles in the last 7 years. Anything that I'm wearing, if I've got a gift, it's a gift, but otherwise I have bought nothing, no textiles in 7 years. Why? Because I don't need, I have enough textiles for a lifetime. I will recommend all of you take a very simple course of 12 lectures called the Energy Swaraj Foundation course. The latest movement from Energy Swaraj Foundation, it is run by a gentleman called Chetan Solanki, professor in IIT Bombay. For the last 12 years, he's been on unpaid leave. He's driving a solar-powered bus across India and living in the bus. Yeah. His latest one is, wrinkles are good. If everybody here stopped ironing, we would have stopped, if just the city of Baroda, what about 3 million people? If nobody in Baroda ironed their shirts, we would have reduced close to 75,000 tons of CO2 per year. So, as far as possible, you know, I wear something over it, I iron nothing. It doesn't make me look much worse, trust me. Or at least if it is, it doesn't bother me too much, right? So remember this, another very dangerous one is data. Data has become a habit for us. We send messages, we send good morning messages, we forward things. Remember that a single Google search is like a night lamp for 1 second. A single good morning message is similar. If all the good morning messages of India were saved and not sent, we would save 200,000 babies in NICU with ventilators. That's in incubators. That's the amount of energy we save. So that's also a form of overconsumption data. So we'll just get to ESG. I know I'm running tight on time now. I think about 5-6 minutes maybe. But ESG is a framework, right? It's a way of thinking. There are frameworks on ESG. Suddenly there's a lot of interest in BRSR, but it's not about ticking boxes. It's about being very acutely conscious. It's about asking yourself, what am I doing right now? Another simple example of a lifestyle thing that I do. I normally will never take a lift down. I might take a lift up for convenience or because my knees are getting old, but unless I really must, even if it's a 30-story building, I will take the stairs. Why? Because when I take a lift down and it's a lift running only for me, it's wasteful use of power. Right? Does anybody know how much carbon dioxide is emitted by 1 unit of power? The answer is about a kg. 1 liter of petrol, the answer is about 3 kgs. 1 liter of LPG, the answer is about 3 kgs. You keep those numbers in hand and you ask questions, and if you use an app like Cool the Globe, the Cool the Globe allows you to measure your own carbon footprint every day. So just get into the habit. Even if you say, okay, I will do it, at least you're consciously making a choice. And that is a reflection of an editorial in this morning's Indian Express Baroda edition that says, choosing our future. What do we want? We want a sustainable planet, or we want it to be hotter, dirtier, more disease-ridden? Is that what we want? And we can't expect governments to do it, trust me. So here's the commercial angle, that ESG scores have actively started hitting the cost of capital today. If you have better ESG metrics compared to worse ESG metrics, you will actually be able to raise money, whether debt or equity, at a lower cost than if you had worse ESG metrics. So think of that spread between a good ESG metric and a poor ESG metric as being paid back for your ESG related investments or efforts. And in fact, in India now we actually have ESG funds. We have a whole bunch of them. We have close to 20,000 crores invested with SBI, Axis, Mirai, and others. And you can see that there are even 3 nifty ESG indices. One of them looks at all the companies in the Nifty, then the sector leaders, and then the enhanced ESG index, which then takes out companies that are not highly compliant. Now, not every piece of commerce or industry will be listed on the stock exchange. Not every piece of commerce and industry will be a conglomerate required to be filling out BRSR compliance documents. But almost every piece of commerce and industry will be plugged into a value chain or a supply chain that does go to that top of the pyramid. Therefore, the sooner we do it, the better it is, not only commercially, it makes economic sense, but also for the planet and for its people. And let's not mix up words like sustainable and decarbonization. You hear words like decarbonization, there's all sorts of things being done. But actually a better word is resource efficiency. How well are we using our wastes? We made some commitments at COP26. These are commitments made on our behalf. So we can't say the government's going to do it. We're going to have to do it. And globally, if we look at where those emissions are, it's mostly buildings, it's transport, and it's everything else. Right? Transport, industry, buildings, and power and heat, if I reallocate, you can see that the biggest chunk is industry. 43% is industry. And we'll look at some examples very quickly. But what are the general ideas? The general idea is be more energy efficient, be more conscious about energy efficiency. Simple things. Switch off lights, run ACs 1 degree higher. Those are easy. But invest in solar power, invest in hybrid power, invest in biofuels, invest in waste utilization. What are those options? Those options are those which you'll be able to measure. So I'm just going to do this at a very general level of ESG metrics. that metrics are only guidelines for you, but they help you measure. And if you can't measure, you can't improve. Simple. And if you set targets, and if you not only set but you communicate the targets, you are putting pressure on yourself to do something better. But it's also great for brand value. As long as you are not greenwashing. That means as long as you are not projecting something that you're not actually doing. I can name large companies, but we won't name the brands, but I can name large companies who support a lot of climate conferences and then would be extracting groundwater to the last drop, right? I know of places where groundwater has been extracted so far that buildings have started sinking in the mountains, and I've actually done relief work there. I've known of very large companies who have different standards of safety in their home country and in India. And in India, when there was a disaster, and I had to be airlifted in the middle of the pandemic to go take care of 4,000 displaced people and 300 people in hospital. At that time, the only question I asked the international company was, can you show me that your standards were the same? And they could not. Unlike Bhopal, I would say it is at least pleasing that those people are in jail. So ESG is also about the flip side. What happens if you're not compliant? Will you actually cause an environmental outage? There is a recent case in Ludhiana where a sewer line blew up and 11 people died. Till today, responsibility is not fixed. But it was in an industrial belt, so somebody probably dumped acid, which caused the formation of gases, which caused the sewer line to explode. Right? So there's a number of ESG frameworks. There'll be a lot of discussions on that, so I'm not going there. But a framework is just that. It's just a framework, right? It's the same kind of framework as a regulatory framework that says, please wear a helmet, or please wear a seatbelt in the front seat or the back seat. In the beginning, very few people do it. After a while, people understand the value, a combination of rational persuasion and rules, and sometimes you fall in line. But the key is the metrics. What are you actually doing? How much of nature are you drawing upon? What's your greenhouse gas emission? Are you paying your taxes? The wages, are they giving a decent quality of life to your employees? If not, can you redesign your processes to do that? So in Chhattisgarh, there's an interesting installation. I worked in it closely. I'll give you an example in a minute, where the lady who was making the tea is now running the factory. Because it's ultimately the same thing. A chemical factory is heat and beat, shake and bake, pots and pans, but you could upskill the lady who was making the tea, right? But for that, you need a process that is amenable to her ability to skill up there. If you judge an elephant by its ability to climb a tree, it's a poor elephant. So these are the big sector risks. If I look at some of the big ones, almost all commerce will fall in this. And we can share these slides freely with FGI. I think you can just do that. I've actually sent a PDF so that you can please share it with all your constituents. These are public domain information. But you can see with every business where your risks are. And these are good maps to have in your hand, because you can ask yourself, what are my risks? How do I mitigate them? And what metrics you use. It's all out there. I won't have to go through it. But pick the ones most relevant to you. It needs a bit of homework, but not a lot of homework. I'll just pick one as energy transition and show you how that can be made very easy. That's a field in which I've worked for about 20 years now. And the way to think about it is, we've all learned from childhood that India has to import fossil fuels, right? We've all heard. Anybody has not heard this? It's false. We should have never had to import. In 1978 was the first gasohol effort in India, but there were interests, there are still interests, who earn money from the trading of fossil fuels. And there has been a commercial drive to avoid that until about 2003. That became a conscious attention. Now, how do these 330 million tons of carbon atoms that I import every year, this number was 350 just 5 years ago. In 5 years, from just two efforts, ethanol blending in petrol and biogas production, we have reduced 6% of our carbon atom imports. How do I reduce them? I can go to better efficient systems, so I consume less energy. I can go to solar, wind, non-carbon energy. Or I can find carbon atoms in India. How many carbon atoms do I throw in India? The number is 500 plus. I throw away more than 50% excess of the carbon atoms I import every year. If I just learn to use what I throw, we would never have to import fuel again. That's something to UCO is used cooking oil. Every person who has a canteen, every person who has a compound, please reuse the used cooking oil in your canteen to make biodiesel and throw it in your genset along with your diesel. That much diesel you will save. I'll show you how easy it is in a minute. And for every fuel that is known in India, for every fuel, these 7 fuels constitute 98% of the country's fuel use. And for these 7 fuels, alternates are known today. We just haven't built the supply chains sufficiently or decentralized. But today we have, the government's announced a major biogas initiative. And I would encourage the industries not only to do biogas in your own industry, but maybe with FGI, support biogas plants in clusters or even in communities that can replace cooking gas. Does anybody here have pipe gas in their house? Pipe cooking gas, wherever you live? Are you using a PNG burner or are you using your old LPG burner with some jugaad to fix the nozzle? Probably old LPG. Please change your stoves. 25% of your gas is lost. You're paying 25% more. And the gas is 80 times more dangerous than CO2. It's methane. You're also increasing risk of kitchen fires. Please switch to PNG burner stoves. These are simple things. This is the one I mentioned. This is a technology my old team pioneered. We are now running it in Chhattisgarh. We are running in Kashipur. We are actually running it in farmers' fields. You just take an oil. It could be cooking oil. It could be castor oil, anything. You add a few things to it. You go for lunch. You come back. Your biodiesel is ready. Your byproduct is glycerine, which is sold in the market. There is no heating involved. The stirring can be, you can hook it up to a children's seesaw, and while the kids play on the seesaw, that energy runs the machine. So these simple things, the cost of the machine is 5 lakh rupees. And it produces 160 liters of diesel a day with purely manual labor, no bijli, or minimal bijli, with a motor running for about 5 minutes. Similarly, we have a dry ice machine. Dry ice is an important component of cooling systems for keeping fruits and vegetables fresh. It's a public domain machine. We have not kept any patent using the principles of ESG. The machine costs 5,000 rupees. With unskilled labor, it makes a block of dry ice every 2 minutes. So simple things that you can adopt as you go ahead. But in the end, what we're really seeing is that there's a global energy economy. Energy underpins everything. You can't do any activity without energy. But the energy economy has been a fossil fuel economy, and today, because of ESG, an energy transition is taking place. Then all these climate pledges, the COP28 that's happening, I've been India's representative at one of the IPCCs. I refused to travel to the IPCC. I said, we should be hybrid mode. If I'm going to fly in a plane and have a carbon footprint, so the entire Indian delegation was in hybrid mode for the IPCC 56. And several other delegations did the same. But again, climate pledges are pledges. Promises are promises, but promises can be broken. Unfortunately, promises are being made by somebody else. It's our job to keep it, and we have to be conscious. But let's not ignore social factors. And when I say social factors, I don't only mean social media. I also mean social equity and inclusivity. But social media is a very powerful factor. It can actually make or break a business or its reputation. Finally, the key point also made earlier by the CEA, that we can deliver sustainability, which is key to ESG, only by focused, measured initiatives and collaborative supply chains. And those initiatives have to cover the S and the G parts as well. I thank you for your attention. I think that this is the last campus I lived on. I lived there for 6.5 years. We have no mobile towers in that campus. After we removed the mobile towers, the population of butterflies went up almost double, and the population of birds went up almost triple. Thank you.